Welcome to Bed Crime Stories podcast. I'm your host, T. Happy Sunday. Hope you found some time to relax this weekend. Do me a favor, smash the like button and subscribe to the channel. I am not monetized, so if you want to support my work, please consider a Patreon membership. You can find out how to do that in the description. In July 2014, brilliant Florida State law professor Dan Markel was gunned down in his own garage in Tallahassee, Florida. Over time, the investigators discovered that Markel's death resulted from a sinister murder-for-hire plot driven by a bitter custody battle between Markel and his ex-wife, Wendi Adelson. Prosecutors have said that Wendi's family orchestrated the plot, paying hired hitmen through her brother, wealthy periodontist Charlie Adelson. Over the decade following the crime, a trail of secret phone calls, suspicious payments, and undercover recordings revealed a chilling conspiracy that tore apart two families and exposed the lengths to which some will go in the name of control, hatred, and revenge. At the center of the case is Wendi Adelson. The crime was carried out primarily for her benefit. Dan Markel dying meant that Wendi could immediately move to South Florida with her and Danny's two sons, despite a judge in Tallahassee ruling against such a move, and despite Dan making it clear that he wanted to be just as much of a parent to his sons, Benjamin and Lincoln, as Wendi and Donna wanted to be. Yes, grandmother Donna wanted to control the kids. Dan's demise also meant that Wendi could have total control over her sons. Wendi could then change the boys' last names from Markel to Adelson, which she did, and no longer would Wendi face backlash for not serving the boys a kosher diet. Wendi was also saved from possibly having her law license revoked if Dan Markel could prove in court that she'd failed to be fully truthful in her sworn financial affidavit during their divorce. Dan believed that Wendi had understated her assets and income. And speaking of money, Dan's death meant that Wendi suddenly owned his house on Trescott Drive. She also received a great deal of life insurance money. Dan had $2 million life insurance policies on his head, one for Lincoln and one for Ben, as well as a life insurance policy from FSU. While some of the life insurance money went to Dan's sister for safekeeping, Wendi got the lion's share. She also went on to receive $4,800 in Social Security money to help raise her sons. She also received all of Dan's cash savings. In essence, she became a millionaire once he died. So there were definitely financial advantages for Wendi. And Wendi's mother, Donna Adelson, also benefited from Dan's death. Dan was pushing for Donna to only be allowed to spend time with his young sons with supervision. The boys had told their father that Grandma called him stupid and said that he wanted to take her sunshines, them, away. Dan believed that Donna was trying to alienate him from his sons. Despite Wendi Adelson gaining the most from Dan's death, she has yet to be charged in connection to the unaliving, and she maintains that she was not involved. But many believe Wendi was involved, and they're hoping that if that's true, she will soon be charged and tried in a court of law. The Markel family will not receive full justice until all the guilty parties are convicted. And remember, the prosecutors don't have to charge Wendi and or her father, Harvey, with murder. There are other charges that Wendi could face, most notably perjury. If Wendi was involved in funneling payments to the go-between Katie McBanawa, then there could be charges related to that as well. She could also be charged as an accessory after the fact if she helped Charlie, Donna, Katie, Sigfredo Garcia, and Luis Rivera avoid getting caught. And if evidence were to emerge that Wendi actively helped conceal the crime or covered for her family members, she could also be charged as an accessory. Today I want to talk about Wendi what she's really like behind the turquoise-colored contact lenses, the fluffy hair, and the conservative clothing. Wendi grew up in Coral Springs, Florida, with her mother, Donna, her father, the dentist, Harvey, and her two older brothers, Rob and Charlie. Coral Springs is considered a middle to upper class, family-oriented suburb. It has a significant Jewish community and thus has its share of synagogues, Jewish day schools, and community centers. Donna was a very involved parent, some would say overly involved. It sounds like Donna and Harvey gave their kids every opportunity to excel academically and in life in general. In high school, Wendi was academically successful. There are reports that she won a Miami Herald Silver Knight Award in 1997 for a project helping underprivileged children. The Silver Knight Award is a prestigious high school honor in South Florida. It was created to recognize exceptional students who combine academic achievement with deep community service. Wendi was also valedictorian of her 1997 high school class. In her class yearbook, Wendi was voted most likely to succeed. Thus, it sounds like she was a very driven person from a young age and was gifted with intelligence. A high school classmate of Wendi's, Melissa Peterson, wrote an article recently for Moment magazine about her memories of Wendi and Donna Adelson. Melissa wrote that she always looked up to Wendi. She crossed paths with Wendi after high school as well. Melissa's husband and Wendi's husband, Dan Markel, had mutual friends. Also, Melissa gave birth within weeks of Wendi doing the same. According to Melissa, Wendi's mother Donna was always known as a Jewish mother par excellence. Melissa said her own mother would often see Donna at the drugstore or Kinko's, as both of the mothers ran errands for their daughters. At trial, one of Donna's friends testified that she was, quote, the ultimate Jewish mother, very involved with her children and grandchildren's lives. Melissa wrote in her article that she found it chilling to see this Jewish mother extraordinaire on trial for murder. Melissa saw Donna as someone who exuded loving warmth, so now it's jarring to see her linked to a crime of hate. After high school, Wendi attended Brandeis University and later earned a master's degree in international relations from the prestigious Cambridge University. After that came law school. Wendi obtained her law degree from the University of Miami. She also published a novel, This Is Our Story, in 2011. Some people think her novel was based on her life with Dan Markel. But all of that is mostly the Wendi Adelson before she met Dan Markel. The Wendi Adelson on paper. What most of us want to know is, who is the real Wendi Adelson? The Wendi behind the carefully curated public persona who has shown up in court at each trial associated with Dan Markel's death. She showed up because she was subpoenaed. During her testimony on the stand in all of the trials, Wendi has come across as a very articulate and polished woman. She maintains her cool, for the most part, even when getting grilled, and insists that she was not involved in the crime. She has an excuse for every negative action she's taken since Markel's death. When some of the lawyers pointed out ways in which she iced the Markels out of her sons' lives, even going so far as to change their names, Wendi claims she did this to protect her children, not to erase their deceased father from their lives. When she's been queried about leaving Tallahassee so soon after Dan's death, Wendi once again claims it was not because she hated Tallahassee, but rather because she had a support system in South Florida. But unfortunately for Wendi, however, we've heard from people who know Wendi, including her ex-boyfriend, Jeffrey Lacasse, and Dan's good friend, Tamara Demko, that behind the curtain, Wendi's authentic self isn't quite so polished, upstanding, and admirable. Lacasse, who began dating Wendi in the fall of 2013 and was with her for 9 months, is an associate professor in the College of Social Work at Florida State University. His insight into the real Wendi and the Wendi leading up to the crime is invaluable. Jeff told detectives from the Tallahassee PD that he was seeing a therapist during his relationship with Wendi, and the therapist came to believe that Wendi was a sociopath. Jeff added that from his experiences, Wendi was a pathological liar and exceptionally manipulative. Common traits of a sociopath include a disregard for rules and laws. We know that Wendi has told lies on the stand despite being a lawyer. We also know that during her divorce with Dan filed a motion to force Wendi to disclose assets. He cited Wendi's failure to reveal more than $200,000 in her divorce filings. Sociopaths are also commonly known for chronic lying and deception. During his relationship with Wendi, Jeff discovered that she was cheating on him during trips away for conferences. What Lacasse described was a serial cheater who spent time with multiple other men during their relationship. He makes it sound like she was pretty promiscuous, allegedly. We also know that, according to Jeff, Wendi hated living in Tallahassee, and she blamed herself being stuck there on Dan Markel. And yet, each time she gets up on the stand and is asked if she liked living in Tallahassee, she said she loved Tallahassee, she loved her job, and she felt relieved when a judge ruled that she could not relocate to South Florida with her kids. Based on everything we've heard, that is simply not true. After the crime, Wendi, according to Jeff, told her friends that Jeff was stalking her, despite that not being the case. And so, if all of this is true, then it appears that Wendi can lie with remarkable ease, even when under oath, even when sitting down with detectives from the Tallahassee PD. Sociopaths often manipulate or exploit others for personal gain. Now, Jeff believes that Wendi was likely setting him up to look like a viable suspect in Dan's death. And Wendi had Jeff wrapped around her finger. Even with her cheating on him, he loved her. He didn't want to break up. He would have even taken her back after all that crap. Sociopaths can also be impulsive, aggressive, or hostile and prone to fights. Jeff said that if he would in any way criticize Wendi, she would lose her shit. Even if she was baking a cake and it didn't turn out right, she would come completely unglued. He also said that she plays the victim very easily, throws tantrums, and is very childlike, almost to the degree of acting like a 13-year-old girl. He described her as being very fragile without any resilience. And he said she needs to be taken care of. Sociopaths can also display superficial charm, and they often have a lack of empathy for others. Jeff said that Wendi is very narcissistic and tended to only think about herself. And Wendi even said that Dan Markel had told her that she's not a good person, that she hides it really well, but that he knew the truth about her. Jeff Lacasse also said that Wendi could be easily influenced by others, especially by her parents. Jeff was saying that perhaps Wendi didn't plan Dan Markel's death, but maybe she was convinced by her mother and her brother that there was no other way for her to be able to ever move from Tallahassee to Miami, at least until the kids were 18. Jeff also described Wendi as being completely disorganized. Jeff also described Wendi as non-confrontational, and as an example, he cited the way that she, with the help of her parents, moved out of the house on Trescott Drive, took most of the furniture, left divorce papers for Dan on the mattress of their bed, took their 2 young sons, and disappeared for at least 2 weeks without letting Dan know where they were. This was so traumatic for Dan that he referred to it as his Pearl Harbor, a sneak attack on his marriage and family life that devastated him and sunk his marriage. To do something like that to the father of your children, a man who by all accounts was devoted to those boys, is unspeakably cruel. It shows a total lack of empathy for Dan and a great deal of immaturity and deviousness. Wendi wasn't a woman trying to escape the clutches of a violent man. Why did she do all of that behind his back? Why couldn't she just have a discussion and say, I want to have a divorce? Lacoste said that Wendi often drank her dinner. She could down a bottle and a half of wine. He shared that she was taking a high dose of Lexapro when he met her. And later, when she wanted to get off of it, she didn't take his advice to do it slowly. Jeff said her father, Harvey, was prescribing meds for her. Jeff also noticed that sometimes she would be sobbing at night, but she wouldn't tell him why. My overall take from what Jeff Lacoste has said is that although Wendi is an accomplished person with a law degree and 2 sons, she's also very dependent on other people. She can look like a fierce, polished professional in court, but at home, when nobody's watching, she falls apart. And if she was that dependent on her parents back in 2013 and 2014, you have to wonder, how is she faring these days with her mother in the clink for life and Harvey living alone in the condo? And it sounds like she's mostly not in touch with her parents and not in touch with her brother. We know that Donna was upset with Wendi after Charlie's trial and his verdict. Donna didn't feel like Wendi was being sensitive enough because she failed to inquire about how Charlie was doing after his devastating guilty verdict. She also failed to drive over to her parents' house after the verdict. She wasn't trying to comfort them in any way. Could this be because Wendi lacks empathy and maybe she really is a sociopath? Or was she desperate to separate herself from the people who have been found guilty in the case? Or does she feel guilty because she's the reason that Charlie hired the hitmen, and that Donna maybe was the mastermind behind the plot? Seeing her brother found guilty maybe was painful for her. Maybe. One thing we can be sure of, she doesn't want to be charged and she doesn't want to go to prison for life. Nobody does. Maybe she's living with paranoia. Maybe she's unsure if law enforcement is listening in on her calls. Is she waiting like her brother Charlie did for the day the cops show up at her door with an arrest warrant? One slip of the tongue overheard by L.E. could spell the difference between becoming another convicted Adelson or living life free of shackles. Maybe Wendi is concerned that if she appears concerned about Charlie, her sons will think, well, why are you okay with your brother doing this to our father? Are you forgiving your brother and your mother for conspiring to unalive our father? There are rumors that Wendi's trying to arrange to have her boyfriend adopt her sons. We've also heard that when the Markels get to visit with the boys over Zoom, Wendi controls how long the visits are. To me, all of this behavior spells Wendi trying to keep her sons away from the Markels. I think she's desperate for her sons to believe it when she says she wasn't involved in their father's death. As a mother, she's going to want to maintain her relationship with her sons. And so that begs the question, if she is charged, will the boys remain steadfastly loyal to her, or will they want to get closer to the Markel side of their family? Will they start asking questions? Tamara Demko, who was good friends with both Dan Markel and Wendi, was interviewed by the Tallahassee PD one day after Dan was shot. At that time, Demko was already suspecting that perhaps some Adelson family members were involved in Dan's death. Her spidey sense was triggered during her encounters specifically with Harvey Adelson. And I'll tell you more about that a little later. Demko told Detective Craig Isom about how painful it was for Dan when Wendi vacated their marital home with Benjamin and Lincoln while he was away in New York City and when she asked for the divorce. Demko stated that Wendi and Dan's divorce was probably the nastiest one she'd ever seen. Both Dan and Wendi played dirty with each other, and both of them told their friends that they would have to decide if they were Team Danny or Team Wendi. Wendi told Tamara that Dan was psychologically abusive to her and used the fact that he was 5 years older than she was as a power play. But Demko felt that Wendi had made Dan's life pure hell. According to Demko, Danny went into a deep depression during the divorce. Dan told Demko that Wendi was unstable and flaky, and at first, Demko didn't believe this, but she said over time she saw that Wendi would do things like make plans with friends and then cancel them. She wasn't very reliable. We know that Wendi's mother, Donna, wanted Wendi to offer Dan $1 million for letting her move to Miami with the boys, but Wendi claims that she never made the offer to Dan. I think the reason Wendi didn't offer Dan the money was because she knew he wasn't the type of person who would be swayed by $1 million. No amount of money would have convinced him to allow Wendi to take his sons to Miami. Demko described Wendi as feeling trapped in Tallahassee. Wendi expressed that there was no way anybody could force her to stay in Tallahassee, but Danny said there was no way anybody was going to cut off his access to his kids. So it was always going to be an endless tug of war, unless something happened to one of the parties. Demko confirmed that Wendi refused to give the Holocaust diamond ring back to Dan, and she confirmed that Wendi took whatever she wanted out of the Trescott home, forcing Dan to spend $10,000 to replenish the furniture. Demko also flat out stated that Wendi did not love Dan and there was nothing that Dan could have done to change her mind. According to Demko, Wendi married Dan not because she felt passionate love for him, but because he was the type of guy her parents believed she should marry. Wendi apparently had cold feet even before the wedding, but she went ahead with it. Demko said that prior to Dan's death, the situation with the divorce and the custody was spiraling, and the post-divorce litigation was horrible. According to Demko, in June of 2014, so 1 month before Dan's death, Dan expressed that the situation with Wendi was getting ugly again. Demko also told Detective Isom that Wendi spoke positively to her about her boyfriend, Jeff Lacasse. But when Demko drove over to Wendi's house after the crime, she asked Wendi, "Where's your new guy?" And Wendi was like, "What new guy? I don't have a boyfriend." This shows how Wendi plays with the truth. She had somewhat broken up with Lacasse before the crime. She asked him for a period of no contact, but he'd been her boyfriend for the previous 9 months. Tamara Demko found out about the crime, or the shooting rather, from her students. She told detectives that she called Amy Adler, Dan's girlfriend, after the crime and talked to her for a long time. Demko said that Amy was concerned about traveling to Tallahassee for Dan's memorial because she worried somebody might want to hurt her. She too was feeling bad juju about the whole thing. When Demko found out about the shooting, she drove over to Wendi's house. She told Detective Isom that going to Wendi's house did not make her feel better. When she arrived, Wendi had her friend Janine with her, as well as Janine's husband. According to Demko, Wendi looked calm when she opened the front door, and she immediately spit out the words, "I'm so sorry." Wendi knew how much Demko loved her friend Dan. Demko also noticed how Janine was acting like a bodyguard, surrounding Wendi. Demko ran into Donna Adelson as well at the house, and Donna explained how she and Harvey had driven all night. To Demko, Donna appeared appropriately upset, so Demko didn't get any bad vibes off Donna. However, when she locked eyes with Harvey, it was a totally different situation. Demko sensed anger in Harvey, and she said she felt like Harvey was giving her a look that said, "I'm guilty, and I know that you know I'm guilty." This left Demko feeling upset. Then the next day, when she saw Harvey again, this time he wouldn't even look in her direction and he completely iced her. This only heightened Tamara's uneasy feeling that maybe some of the Adelsons were involved. Demko told Detective Isom she wouldn't put it past Harvey or Wendy's brother Charlie to do this to Dan. She emphasized that there was a lot of animosity between the Adelsons and Dan Markel. Dan, according to Demko, was finally feeling happy after he met Amy Adler, but Wendi continued to be this big negative elephant in his life. Dan told Demko that Wendi had hidden $500,000 in assets during their divorce. Per Demko, Dan told her he was going to drop a legal bomb on Wendi the week after the crime. He was going to use Wendy's dishonesty about the assets to discredit her. His hope was that the legal bomb would, 1, prompt Wendi to return the Holocaust diamond ring, and 2, land her in legal hot water for her deception and possibly get her disbarred. So to Demko, the timing of Dan's death and the fact that it looked like a hired hit were highly suspicious. Demko also stated that the Adelsons, Harvey and Donna, felt that Dan owed Wendi. Demko felt that Wendi must have filled her parents' heads with all sorts of reasons to feel this way toward Danny. And Danny was confused because in the beginning, he and the Adelsons got along really well. Demko also noticed that right after the crime, Wendi and Donna were ignoring Ruth Markel's requests to see her grandsons. Thus, it was clear to Demko that Wendi was probably going to make it difficult, if not impossible, for Ruth and Phil Markel to spend time with their grandchildren. And Demko was spot on. That's exactly what Wendi ended up doing. To me, this points to Wendi's inability to feel empathy for others. At the time, Benjamin and Lincoln knew their paternal grandparents and their cousins. If Wendi really cared about her kids' emotional well-being, you'd think she would not have torn the Markels away from them. Losing their father was going to be very difficult on Benjamin and Lincoln. Losing their paternal grandparents as well as their cousins could only make that loss all the more painful and upsetting. I find it fascinating that both Demko and Lacasse were convinced early on that some of the Adelsons were likely involved in the crime. And yet it took the police 2 years before they could come up with enough evidence to charge anyone. And the initial arrests were for the hitmen, Sigfredo Garcia and Luis Rivera. That happened in 2016. The first Adelson to be charged in connection with the crime, Charlie, wasn't arrested until April 21st of 2022. So the Adelsons were allowed to live their best lives post Dan's death for 8 years. Although Charlie Adelson did say in a jailhouse call with his parents on the day he was convicted that he'd been living with the fear of getting arrested for a long time. And according to Charlie's girlfriend, June Umchinda, after the 2 hitmen were arrested, after the FBI bump operation where an undercover agent approached Donna demanding money to stay quiet, and after the case began to appear in the media, Charlie was, quote, never the same. June said he became angry. He kept clothing by his bed on the chance police would raid his house at night. Suddenly he had weapons. He also placed barbed wire around the exterior of his house, and he installed security cameras. So Charlie was definitely paranoid once those initial arrests were made. You have to wonder now if Wendi and Harvey Adelson are living in that same state of being on high alert, especially now that Donna has been convicted. After re-listening to some of Charlie's jailhouse calls with his parents after his conviction, we know that Donna wasn't happy with Wendi's testimony during Charlie's trial. From the calls, we know that Wendi did not drive over to her parents' condo on the day Charlie was found guilty, nor did she ask her parents about how Charlie was doing. Donna was very upset that Wendi showed no concern for Charlie when Charlie was asking if Wendi was okay. So is that another example of Wendi possibly being unable to feel empathy for others? Or was she simply trying to avoid talking about the crime and the case? If Wendi was involved in the conspiracy to unalive Dan Markel, then she clearly did not show much appreciation for her brother Charlie falling on the sword for her. Instead, it sounds like she doesn't want to interact with Charlie or her parents. I'm wondering if this is Wendi trying really hard not to go down with the ship. At this point, I feel like with the Adelsons, it's each man or woman for themselves. So to wrap it up, there seem to be two Wendi Adelsons. The one she shows to the public when testifying in court. That Wendi Adelson is polished, prepared. She's the lawyer. She shows up knowing how she's going to explain things, like driving to the crime scene about an hour after the crime went down. She's the one who confidently says, "They're not going to charge me." The other Wendi is the one behind closed doors. The one who, if we are to believe Jeff Lacoste, is deeply troubled, drinks more than a bottle of wine at night, allegedly, and the one who in 2013 and 2014 was very reliant on her parents. She couldn't drive from Tallahassee to Miami or vice versa without her parents with her. She came across to Jeff Lacoste at times like a 13-year-old girl, not a grown woman with 2 children. So how is Wendi handling life now with her mother and brother behind bars, with her father alone in the Miami condo? Is she frantically making plans like her mom and dad were before Donna was arrested at the airport? Has she had to face any repercussions so far from having her name associated with this sinister crime? We know that Charlie lost some of his gigs at work when the case was widely covered in the media before he was even arrested. So do the other kids at Benjamin and Lincoln School know about the case? Do the other parents at the school give Wendi the side eye? Is Wendi's employer okay with her being associated with a notorious true crime case? We can only guess. I believe Chief Assistant State Attorney Georgia Kappelman will be coming for Wendi next. I wonder if Wendi keeps an outfit next to her bed, just in case the cops come a-knockin'. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I will see you next time on Bed Crime Stories. Please smash that like button, and please subscribe. Love you guys, and I will see you next time.